During my daughter's wedding, she instructed the security to throw me out when I showed up. A wedding I fully paid all expenses for. I didn't fight back. I just went back home only to find a letter in the mailbox from her saying she had found her real family. What happened next was rather unexpected. I will tell you everything. First, let me quickly thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout out in our next story. Today's special shout out goes to Jason Grant from London. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's go deeper into the story. There's a certain kind of silence that only exists in a house the morning before a major event. One that feels both sacred and suffocating, like the whole world is holding its breath. That was the silence I woke up to. No music, no clatter from the kitchen, not even the hum of the refrigerator felt loud enough to cut through the stillness. Just me and the heavy awareness that my daughter was getting married today. My body had woken up long before the alarm, the way it used to when she was a baby, and I'd rise at the first sign of a whimper. It was instinctual, like my soul needed time to prepare. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long while, staring at the suit hanging on the door. Navy blue, neatly pressed, with the tie she'd picked out herself. A dark green with silver flecks that she once said brought out the color in my eyes. I remembered the look on her face when she held it up against my chest weeks ago, half smiling. I thought that meant something. Thought it meant we were still connected in that quiet way fathers and daughters sometimes are, even when words get fewer and the space between hugs grows longer. I hadn't seen her much in the final weeks leading up to the wedding, but I told myself that was normal. She was busy, planning, growing, stepping into her future. I didn't want to take that personally. I didn't want to believe I was being edged out of something I helped build. Getting ready felt like going to a ceremony I'd been rehearsing my whole life. I shaved slowly, with the same razor I used the day I took her to her first father-daughter dance. I polished my shoes with the same cloth I'd used for every one of her graduations. My hands moved like muscle memory, steady but weighted, like they knew something my heart wasn't ready to admit. I packed a handkerchief in my coat pocket. I fully expected to cry today, not out of sadness, but pride. I imagined her walking down the aisle, radiant in white, eyes shining, and me right beside her. I'd practiced the speech I wasn't sure I'd have the guts to give at the reception. I'd imagined lifting a glass and saying something about how love is a choice, just like parenthood is. That it's not blood that makes a family, but showing up every damn day when it's hard. When she first told me she was engaged, I cried in the car after dropping her off. Not because I was losing her, but because I was proud of the woman she'd become, or thought she had become. I left the house earlier than necessary. I wanted to be there when the florists arrived, make sure the band had everything they needed, oversee the final touches like any father footing the bill would. It wasn't just money. I had put my heart into this wedding. Every dollar was a sacrifice. I skipped vacations, deferred home repairs, cut corners on everything so she could have the fairy tale she dreamed of. She wanted a garden wedding, surrounded by white roses and fairy lights, with live string music and hand-painted signs for the signature cocktails. I said yes to all of it. Didn't blink. Didn't flinch. This was my way of saying I'm proud of you, even if the words felt harder to say out loud than they used to. When I pulled into the gravel parking lot behind the venue, I sat in the car for a moment, just breathing. I looked down at my hands gripping the steering wheel, calloused, lined, aged by years of work and sacrifice, and I felt something that surprised me. Fear. A small, twisting knot in my gut I couldn't quite name. I shook it off, told myself I was just emotional. Weddings do that to people. I walked toward the venue with a sense of anticipation, the kind that prickles at the back of your neck and tightens your chest. The white rose arches were already up, exactly like she wanted. I heard music playing softly in the distance, the sound of laughter, chatter, life. I made it to the gate, expecting someone, anyone, to greet me. But instead, two unfamiliar men in black suits stepped in front of me. Security. One of them held a tablet. "Name, sir?" he asked, polite but detached. "Daniel Reynolds," I said, confused. "Father of the bride." The second man glanced at the screen, then back at me. "I'm sorry, Mr. Reynolds. We've been instructed not to allow you entry." I stared at them, the words not quite registering. There must be a mistake. I paid for this wedding. I'm her father. I understand, sir, the first guard said. But the bride gave us specific instructions. You're not on the list. I looked past them toward the crowd. That's when I saw her. Natalie, my daughter, my little girl in white. She was standing beneath the rose arch, laughing with a couple I didn't recognize. A woman and a man, both dressed to the nines, smiling, proud. She looked right at me. Our eyes met. And in that split second, I waited for something. A smile. A wave. A look of surprise and confusion. Anything. But she turned away. Just turned. Like she hadn't seen me. Like I wasn't even there. I didn't fight it. I didn't yell or plead or cause a scene. I just nodded, stepped back, turned around, and walked away with my hands in my pockets and my heart crumbling with every step. The drive home was a blur. I don't even remember turning the key in the ignition. I don't remember the drive itself, just the crushing weight of disbelief. This couldn't be real. She wouldn't do that. Not her. Not my daughter. But when I pulled into my driveway, I saw it. The letter. A plain white envelope sticking out of the mailbox. My name written in her handwriting. I knew before I even opened it. Somehow I knew. The letter was short. 3 paragraphs. No greeting. No love. Just facts. She said she'd found her real family. That she wanted to move forward with people who shared her blood, who understood her in ways I never could. She said she appreciated the life I gave her, but it was time for her to live hers without the emotional baggage of the past. Without me. She hoped I would respect her decision, that I wouldn't make things harder. I read it twice. Then again, I sat down at the kitchen table, the letter shaking in my hands. I wasn't angry. Not yet. That would come later. What I felt was something deeper. A hollowing. Like someone had scooped out everything I believed about love, about loyalty, about family, and left me with an echo. I stared at the clock on the wall and wondered if the ceremony had started yet. If she was walking down the aisle without me. If she'd cry. If she'd feel anything at all. And then I stood up, walked to the living room, picked up my phone, and began calling every single vendor I had hired. Not to cause pain. Not to get revenge. Just to reclaim something. Myself. My dignity. If she had found her real family, then they could fund the fantasy. Because this father? He was done pretending he didn't matter. There's a particular kind of pain that doesn't announce itself with screams or tears. It just settles in like dust on an old bookshelf, quiet and persistent. That's the kind of pain I carried into the next morning. I hadn't slept. I didn't even bother taking off my suit until the sun started leaking through the blinds. I left it on the back of a dining chair, the sleeves wrinkled, the fabric still carrying the scent of pine and sweat and shame. I made a pot of coffee I didn't drink and sat at the kitchen table listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional chirp of birds waking up to a world that hadn't betrayed them the night before. In my chest was a strange mixture of fury and numbness, like my body didn't quite know which response to go with, so it chose both. I kept replaying the look on her face when she saw me at the gate, how quickly she turned away, how her eyes didn't soften, didn't flinch. She saw me being pushed out like a trespasser and said nothing. That was the moment I knew. I hadn't lost her yesterday. I'd lost her long before, and I just hadn't been ready to see it. The letter she left in my mailbox stayed on the table for most of the morning, unopened for a while, then opened and read again until the paper went soft from my fingertips. It wasn't even a full page. She said she appreciated what I did for her, but felt a connection with her real family. And she wanted to explore that without guilt or attachment to the past. She hoped I'd understand and wouldn't interfere. That word, understand, kept echoing in my head like a slap. Understand what, exactly? That she could throw me out of a life I built for her like I was some temp worker who had overstayed his shift? That 24 years of fatherhood could be voided by biology and a few pretty words from strangers with matching DNA? I had never felt so disposable in my entire life. And worse, she wrote it like she was doing me a favor, like her absence was a kindness I should be thankful for. I didn't tell anyone what happened. Not at first. The truth felt too raw, too humiliating to put into words. What could I say? That the daughter I raised had not only excluded me from her wedding, but orchestrated my public removal? That she wrote me a breakup letter like I was an ex-boyfriend she outgrew? The shame of it clung to me like a second skin. And yet, beneath the shame, something else simmered. Not vengeance exactly, but clarity. I realized, in that moment of unwanted stillness, that this wasn't just about the wedding. This was about every time I had let her pull away without asking why. Every moment I made excuses for her coldness. Every instance I chose peace over confrontation, believing my role as a father was to endure. I had loved her without question, and in return, she had taught me what it meant to be invisible. Around noon, I began making the calls. One by one, I contacted each vendor and canceled any services that hadn't been fully rendered. I wasn't rude. I didn't have to be. Most of them were sympathetic once I explained that I was no longer part of the event and had been removed by the bride herself. The florist was the first to agree. "Honestly, Mr. Reynolds," she said, her voice warm with that practiced vendor politeness, "I had a feeling something was off during the rehearsal. Your name barely came up." The DJ apologized profusely, said he wished he'd known sooner, and assured me he wouldn't charge for the unused hours. The caterer pushed back at first, citing last-minute prep, but eventually relented and agreed to refund a portion of the deposit. Only the wedding planner seemed flustered and unsure how to proceed. "You're the one on all the contracts," she said. "If you're backing out, they don't have a fallback." "Exactly," I thought. Let them figure it out. I didn't tell them to punish her. I didn't say a single cruel word about her. I just made it clear that my involvement had ended, that the man who paid for the fairy tale had been banished from the story, and he was taking his magic wand with him. If she wanted to rewrite her narrative with new characters, fine, but she wouldn't be using my ink to do it. The irony was that I hadn't even wanted anything grand. I wasn't the kind of father who needed a spotlight. All I wanted was to stand quietly to the side, to watch her smile, and think to myself, we made it. To maybe get a nod, a squeeze of the hand, a whispered, "Thank you, Dad," at some point between photos and cake. But instead, I got a rejection wrapped in a bow of entitlement. And now, with the vendors gone and the timeline collapsing, I imagined her scrambling, trying to call in favors from people who had never wiped her tears or held her through night terrors. I didn't feel proud of that image, but I didn't feel guilty either. Sometimes, letting someone fall is the only way they learn gravity still applies. That afternoon, I got a knock on the door. It was my neighbor, Angela, mid-50s, sharp as a tack, and never missed a beat of neighborhood gossip. She held a plate of cookies and a look of concern. "I heard what happened," she said softly, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "My niece was at the wedding." I didn't say anything, just motioned for her to sit. She placed the cookies down like an offering and sighed. She said people were confused. "No one knew why you weren't there. Someone said you had a medical emergency, but then others saw you getting turned away at the entrance." I clenched my jaw, shame prickling at my ears. Angela looked me straight in the eye. "You did the right thing, Daniel. She embarrassed you in front of all those people. I don't care how old she is. That's not how you treat someone who raised you." I wanted to argue, to say that maybe I had failed somewhere down the line, that maybe I wasn't enough. But the words wouldn't come, because deep down, I knew she was right. I had been more than enough. I had been everything. And now I was done. The days that followed blurred together like a poorly edited film reel, one scene bleeding into the next with no clear transition. I didn't return calls. I didn't open the blinds. I went through the motions of living like someone playing a character he no longer believed in. I made toast I didn't eat, flipped channels without watching, walked past the mirror without recognizing the man inside it. But even through the haze, there was one thing I knew for sure. I wasn't going back. Not to her, not to that life, not to the role I'd been dismissed from so carelessly. For the first time in decades, I didn't feel obligated to explain myself, and that silence, the decision not to justify, was strangely liberating. I didn't need to prove my worth as a father to anyone who had already decided I wasn't one, especially not to a daughter who had chosen image over history, blood over love, convenience over character. The silence didn't last long, of course. By the third day, my phone began vibrating with more urgency. Cousins, old friends, even her godmother trying to make sense of the situation. Some were genuinely concerned, asking if I was okay. Others danced around the subject, as if unsure how to broach the scandal without seeming nosy. and a few were bold enough to suggest I had overreacted, that I had let emotions get the best of me. Overreacted? I nearly laughed out loud the first time I heard that word. I'd spent the entire wedding day being humiliated and excluded, then watched my role as a parent be reduced to a forgotten bank account. And somehow, I was the one who went too far? It amazed me how quickly people defaulted to comfort over truth. How badly they wanted things to look normal, even when nothing about it was. I didn't respond to most of them. But when her godmother, Lydia, called me for the second time, I picked up. Lydia had known my daughter since birth and had been there through the hardest parts, through tantrums and trauma, through court dates and custody hearings. She was one of the few people I trusted to speak to me like a man, not a spectacle. "I'm just gonna say it," she said bluntly, skipping the pleasantries. What she did was cold. Real cold. But she's spiraling, Daniel. I don't think she thought you'd actually walk away. I sat on the couch, rubbing my temples. That's the problem, isn't it? She thought I wouldn't. She counted on me sticking around no matter how many times she pushed me away. Lydia sighed. "Because you always have." "Not anymore," I said. My voice surprised even me. Firm, steady, final. There was a long pause on the line. I could hear Lydia's breathing, the creak of her kitchen chair, the clink of a spoon in her tea. "She said you canceled everything," she finally said. "Damn right I did," I replied. "She wanted me out of her life, so I took myself out of the picture. That includes the party. She's saying you embarrassed her." I laughed, sharp and bitter. Embarrassed her? She had me escorted out like some wedding crasher. The only person who should be embarrassed is the one who threw away a father in front of 100 people. Lydia didn't argue. Instead, she said something that stuck with me. "You're not just choosing to walk away from her. You're choosing yourself. Took you long enough." After that call, I felt a shift, not in how I felt about her, but in how I saw myself. For years, I defined my worth through what I could give. My time, my energy, my money, my presence. And the thing about giving is, people get used to it. They start to believe it's your job to show up, that your sacrifices are just background noise to the soundtrack of their lives. But what happens when the giving stops? When the ATM says insufficient emotional funds? What happens when the man they took for granted finally remembers his boundaries? I'll tell you what happens. The calls turn into accusations. The guilt trips start rolling in. The story gets rewritten so that you're the villain, cold, withholding, dramatic. But the truth? The truth is simpler. I wasn't withdrawing my love. I was withdrawing from a performance. From a role I had played faithfully for decades without applause. And once I saw it that way, I couldn't unsee it. Later that week, I went to the bank to close the wedding account I had opened in her name. The teller, a young woman with kind eyes, asked if I wanted to transfer the remaining funds somewhere else. I shook my head. "No, I'm going to use it for something else," I said. "Something for me this time." She smiled, probably thinking I meant a vacation or a new car. Maybe I did. Or maybe I just wanted the money to sit somewhere that reminded me of what I still had control over, my future. On my way out, I passed a card shop. Impulse drove me in. I stood in front of the Father's Day section, scanning the rows of cliches and cartoon ties and fishing rods. None of them fit. I didn't buy anything. But standing there, I thought about all the years she'd given me cards with "Best Dad Ever" scrawled across the front. I used to keep them in a drawer, along with her macaroni art and honor roll certificates. I used to read them when the house felt too quiet. I wondered if she ever meant any of it, or if they were just performances, too. That night, I pulled out a journal I hadn't touched in years. It was leather-bound, a gift from a former colleague who said I needed to process things better. I used to roll my eyes at that advice. But now, I found myself writing in it like my life depended on it. I wrote down everything. How I felt when I saw her laugh with strangers while I stood outside like a forgotten uncle. How I stayed silent on that phone call, because nothing I could say would matter to someone who had already made her choice. And how, despite it all, I still hoped she would one day understand not what she lost, but who. Because even now, I didn't hate her. I just refused to let her keep writing me out of the script while expecting me to foot the production costs. And for the first time in a long time, I started writing a new chapter. Not for her. For me. The first voicemail came at 2:43 in the morning. I was half asleep, staring at the ceiling, the fan spinning lazily above me. mocking how still everything else had become. The screen lit up with her name, Natalie. I didn't answer, not out of spite, but because I knew nothing she could say would be about accountability. When it finally went to voicemail, her voice filled the room through the speaker like a ghost I hadn't invited. She was crying, loud, messy crying, and her words stumbled out between shallow breaths. "You ruined everything, Dad. I can't believe you would do this to me. On my wedding day, you made me look like a fool." She paused there, as if expecting me to respond. But I didn't. I just sat in bed, jaw clenched, heart tight, wondering if she ever really saw me as anything more than a safety net, a soft place to land when things got tough, a quiet wallet with arms. The next message came 5 minutes later, angrier this time. "You're acting like a child. I've tried to call you and explain, and all you do is ignore me. You think you're teaching me a lesson? All you've done is show everyone who you really are. You're a bitter, petty man." The word petty echoed in my head like a bullet ricocheting off a steel wall. Petty. That was what she thought of me. Not devoted, not loyal, not even hurt. Just petty. The accusation might have broken me years ago, when I still clung to the idea that being a good father meant absorbing every blow, taking the blame, staying silent in the face of cruelty. But now it only confirmed what I'd come to understand since the day she had me escorted out. She didn't see me as a father. She saw me as an obligation, a resource. And the moment I stopped giving, I became disposable. The third message didn't come until the next morning. Her voice was softer, controlled, almost rehearsed. "I overreacted," she said. "I was just hurt. You weren't supposed to do what you did. But maybe I wasn't fair either. I didn't know how to handle everything. I'm sorry you felt excluded." It wasn't an apology, not really. It was a publicist's statement, a half mea culpa designed to shift just enough guilt without accepting any real fault. She wasn't sorry for what she did. She was sorry for how I reacted to it. Big difference. And I wasn't falling for it. I didn't return any of her calls, and eventually, the silence began to speak louder than her words ever could. That weekend, I went grocery shopping for the first time since the wedding. I ran into one of the groomsmen, Tommy, I think his name was, standing in the frozen food aisle, holding a bag of peas like it might bite him. He did a double take when he saw me, then offered a weak smile. "Hey, Mr. Reynolds, didn't expect to see you here." I raised an eyebrow. Where else would I be? He shifted awkwardly. I just wanted to say I'm sorry for how things went down. A lot of us didn't know what was happening. We thought maybe you got sick or something." I nodded, trying not to betray any emotion. "No, Tommy. I was fine. I just wasn't invited." He winced. "Yeah, that's what I figured." She didn't really explain much. Everyone was confused. Then the food stopped coming and, well, it was kind of a disaster. I didn't smile, didn't gloat, just said, "She made her choices." As I turned to leave, he called out, "For what it's worth, you raised her well." At least, until his voice trailed off, unsure if finishing that sentence would land as an insult or a consolation. Until she stopped being mine, I finished for him. Then I walked away. That night, I sat in my garage, the one I'd turned into a workshop when she was 10 and wanted to build a treehouse. We never finished it. She got bored, moved on to something else, and I was left with the lumber, the tools, and the dust-covered plans. I ran my hands along the edge of the old workbench, thinking about all the projects we never finished, all the things we started and abandoned. It wasn't just a treehouse. It was every effort I made to build something lasting with her. And in the end, I was always the one left with the mess, the cleanup, the loose nails and forgotten blueprints. A part of me still waited for her to come home. Not physically, but emotionally. To call and say, "I see it now. I understand what you did for me." But the more I sat with that hope, the more it felt like waiting for a train on tracks that had already been ripped up. There was no coming back from this. Not because I didn't love her anymore, but because I finally loved myself enough to stop begging for her recognition. The final message she left came 2 days later. It was calm, collected, almost chilling in its detachment. "If this is really how it ends, then I guess there's nothing left to say. I just thought you'd always be there. I thought you loved me enough to forgive this. I guess I was wrong." "No, sweetheart," I thought. "You were wrong to think love meant I had no limits. I deleted all the voicemails that night, not out of anger, but as an act of closure. I cleared the entire log, wiped the notifications, and turned off the ringer. There was nothing left for me in those messages. Nothing I hadn't already heard before. Just a child trying to manipulate the man who had already walked through the fire and finally decided not to burn anymore. The following morning, I opened the blinds for the first time in a week. The sun spilled in like an overdue apology, and I let it wash over me. I made coffee I actually drank, buttered toast, and ate it slowly, deliberately. I sat at the kitchen table and read the newspaper like I had all the time in the world, because now I did. There were no more weddings to fund, no more emergencies to respond to, no more tears to mop up that weren't mine. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. Not because she was gone, but because I finally was. Grief doesn't always look like sadness. Sometimes it looks like cleaning out a closet that hasn't been touched in years, sorting through old photo albums, and wondering what to do with the memories that now feel like relics from a life that didn't quite belong to you. That's what I did the next morning. Stood in my hallway, surrounded by dusty boxes labeled Natalie's art projects, school stuff, and dance recitals, trying to figure out what stayed and what went. There was no plan, no Marie Kondo philosophy of sparking joy, just instinct and a dull ache in my chest as I held each memory in my hands. A finger painting of a rainbow with Daddy scrawled in pink crayon across the top. A faded, glittery card from her 8th grade graduation that read, "Thank you for being the best dad a girl could have." And for a moment, I didn't feel betrayed. I just felt tired. Tired of holding on to proof of something she no longer claimed. Word got out, of course. It always does in families, especially the kind that never talks directly but manages to keep tabs like they're running background checks. The phone rang again that afternoon, but this time it wasn't Natalie or her godmother. It was my younger cousin, Derek, a guy I hadn't spoken to in years, but who clearly hadn't lost the family grapevine number. He launched right into it, like there was no need for small talk. "Man, I just heard. What the hell happened at that wedding?" I paused, unsure how much I felt like reliving. "Depends on which version you heard. She told people you bailed on the wedding last minute. Said you got cold feet about being there and canceled everything to punish her." "Of course she did." I sighed, leaning back in the recliner. "That's not what happened. I didn't bail. I was thrown out. She hired security and told them not to let me in. Then she left me a letter saying she found her real family and was cutting ties." There was a long silence on the other end. Then Derek let out a low whistle. "Damn, that's cold. And after everything you did for her." Apparently, that part didn't matter anymore. "People are starting to talk," he said carefully. "There's a thread on Facebook. One of her bridesmaids posted about the chaos, how the food never arrived, how the DJ never showed up, and how no one knew why you weren't there. Some folks are siding with her, but most are just confused. They said it looked like the wedding fell apart halfway through." "I'm not surprised," I replied. "She made it clear I wasn't welcome. So I stopped funding what I was no longer invited to." Derek hesitated. "I mean, do you regret it?" "No," I said immediately. "She made her choice. I made mine." He didn't argue, and that silence told me more than words ever could. Later that day, I ran into my neighbor's daughter at the hardware store. She'd been at the wedding too. I could tell by the way she looked at me, hesitant, guilty, like she was bracing for a wave that never came. She approached me in the aisle between paintbrushes and caulk, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mr. Reynolds, I just wanted to say I'm sorry." I turned slowly, surprised by her presence more than her words. "I was there," she said. "At the wedding. I saw what happened. A few of us did. And I think people are realizing she handled it badly." I nodded. "Appreciate that. Not many are willing to say it." She looked genuinely pained. "She said you didn't want to come, that you abandoned her." But then she started crying when the caterer left, and the whole thing felt fake. Like she was trying too hard to be the victim. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Some truths speak louder through silence. That evening, I sat down to dinner alone, same as I had all week. Only this time, I brought out the real dishes. Not the chipped old plate I used for lazy nights, but the good set, the one I had planned to use when family came over after the wedding. I poured myself a glass of wine and plated the meal like I was expecting company, even though I wasn't. Maybe it was ridiculous, but I needed to remind myself that I still deserved decency, even in solitude. I didn't need an audience to validate my presence. I didn't need to be someone's father to be someone at all. Later, I scrolled through social media, not out of masochism, but curiosity. Sure enough, I found the post Derek mentioned. It was vague, passive-aggressive, dripping with performative grief. Some people you think will be there forever turn their backs when it matters most. Lesson learned. The comments were a mix of sympathy and skepticism. But one stuck out. Didn't her dad pay for the whole thing? Why would he turn his back if he was funding it? That question hung in my mind like a cord waiting to resolve. Because it wasn't about the money. It never was. It was about being erased. And when you erase someone, you can't expect them to keep coloring in your story. Just before bed, I got an email. Not from Natalie, but from a woman named Claire, a mutual acquaintance who had once dated one of my cousins. She was at the wedding too, apparently. Her message was short, but every word landed with weight. I don't know if this means anything coming from me, but I saw how you were treated. And I want to say I'm sorry. Not just for what happened, but for what it revealed. Some people don't know how to value the hands that held them up the longest. You deserved better. I read it twice, then a third time, and for the first time in days, I felt something close to peace. Because sometimes, it only takes one voice telling the truth to drown out 100 lies. I closed my laptop, turned off the lights, and went to bed with the email still echoing in my head. You deserve better. And maybe for the first time, I believed it. There's a kind of stillness that arrives after the storm, the kind that doesn't feel like peace exactly, but more like acceptance. Not because everything is okay, but because you finally stop expecting it to be. That was the kind of quiet I woke up to 1 week after the wedding. No buzzing phone. No tearful voicemails. No secondhand gossip waiting in my inbox. Just the morning sun spilling through the blinds and the sound of birds outside the kitchen window. I sat at the table with my coffee, black and bitter, and realized I hadn't thought about her voice all morning. I hadn't heard her crying or accusing or pleading in my mind. I hadn't replayed the moment at the gate for the 100th time. And that surprised me, not because I thought I'd forgotten, but because for the first time, I didn't feel responsible for remembering. I decided to go back to the venue that afternoon, not out of some desperate hope to find meaning in the ruins, but because I needed to see it one last time. Closure isn't always found in conversation. Sometimes it's found in returning to the scene and realizing it no longer owns you. The garden was empty, the grass freshly cut, the flowers still in bloom. The same white roses she had picked lined the pathway, like sentries guarding nothing. I stood in the center of the lawn where the chairs had been, where she should have walked down the aisle with me by her side. I looked up at the sky, blue and wide, and let the silence wrap around me like a blanket. There was no music, no guests, no fairy lights, just me and the truth. I had been replaced before I even arrived. I walked toward the tent where the reception had been held, or should have been, had things gone as planned. A few rental workers were packing up leftover equipment, chairs, tables, lighting fixtures. One of them, a kid no older than 20, looked up and nodded at me. You part of the Reynolds wedding? I paused. I was supposed to be. He didn't press. Just went back to stacking chairs. I moved toward a corner of the venue where a small table had been forgotten, probably used for signing the guest book. It was bare now, save for one lone pen and a few scattered place cards. I picked one up. It had my name on it, neatly written in cursive, tucked under a thin layer of dust. I ran my thumb over it, heart thudding in my chest. So she had planned to include me, at least on paper. A place at a table, but not a place in her life. It was symbolic, really. A reserved seat for the father who wasn't welcome. I left the card where I found it. On my way out, I passed a woman in her 60s, well-dressed, hair swept into a tight bun, examining a clipboard. She looked like the venue manager. She caught my eye and offered a polite smile. You here for cleanup? No, I said. Just saying goodbye. Something in my tone made her pause. Her eyes softened. You're her father, aren't you? I nodded. She didn't speak right away. Then she said gently, I saw what happened last week. I've been doing this job for 15 years. Never seen anything like it. I bet, I muttered. She stepped closer. You look like a man showing up to give away his heart. And she looked like someone who'd already given it away. I didn't respond. Just nodded again, throat tight. You deserved better, she added softly. That made two strangers who'd said it. And for the second time, I let it in. On the drive home, I didn't listen to music, didn't turn on the radio, just rolled the window down and let the wind roar through the cabin. I needed the noise, the chaos, to drown out the quiet comfort I was starting to feel. Because comfort meant I was healing. And healing meant she was becoming a chapter, not the whole story. When I got home, I made dinner. A real one. Steak, roasted potatoes, green beans sautéed with garlic. I plated it like I was expecting guests. Lit a candle, poured a glass of red wine. I sat at the table and ate slowly, deliberately, enjoying the food, the solitude, the lack of apology in the air. There was no toast to make, no speech to give, just the knowledge that I had made it through the fire, and somehow, I was still standing. Afterward, I went out to the garage. The old treehouse plans were still there, stuffed behind the workbench. I pulled them out, studied the faded pencil lines, the annotations in Natalie's childlike handwriting. Make the roof pink, one note said. Another circled the ladder design with the word scary, scrawled in all caps. I smiled, not out of sadness, but gratitude. That version of her, the one who drew on blueprints with crayons and asked for help reaching the cereal box, she was real. And I had loved her. But she was gone now, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. Someone who saw love as a resource to be withdrawn the moment it no longer suited her. I rolled up the plans and tucked them back into the drawer. Later that night, I sat on the porch with another glass of wine. The sky was clear. The stars were bright. And I felt no urge to check my phone. No anxiety about missed calls or unread messages. I leaned back in the chair, listened to the cicadas, and realized something that brought a lump to my throat. Peace doesn't always come with forgiveness. Sometimes it comes with boundaries. With walking away from the ones who think your love is conditional simply because it was always guaranteed. She had made her choice. And now I had made mine. I chose me. If you've ever had to walk away from someone you loved like they were your own, someone who made you feel disposable, this story is for you. Sometimes the hardest thing we can do is choose ourselves after being everything to someone else. Tell me in the comments, was he right to cancel the vendors? To walk away? I'd love to hear your story. Let's talk about it. And if this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more real-life family dramas that hit where it hurts and heal where it matters. See you soon in the next story.